Good morning, y'all. My name's Bill, and this is Louisa, and welcome to the Awakening and Conscious Living podcast.
Today,
Yeah, please.
so today we're going to talk about why patterns aren't flaws. We're going to talk a little bit about how they're actually survival strategies, and then we'll follow the episode with some of the conversations that we started our last time and dig deeper into that. And if you stay tuned for the whole episode, you're going to find out about observing without judgment. We're going to talk about whether or not you did your homework from last week.
That's right. If y'all did your homework. So this is about a 10 episode um, podcast on the invisible patterns that control our lives. And last week, Louisa wrote down this, which I thought was completely incredible. Make sure that I can see it. And why our patterns, which are our flaws per se, are outdated survival strategies. So, Louisa, you want to give us just a second? You wrote that. I think it's beautiful because our patterns, um, and maybe we'll do a quick recap of patterns. Okay. We learn to brush our teeth, and that's a pattern.
Mhm.
We don't ever think about it. So patterns are important. We learn to drive a car. We learn to do a left turn, a right turn, parallel parking, whatever it is. And those are all patterns. We embed those in our brains. And so we live out of those patterns, which make our lives very easy. Okay. But we've also assimilated a lot of negative patterns growing up in this world, in this society, what we've been taught. And those patterns can be limiting, like judging people based off of color or social status, or my religion is the only religion, the only way to get to God type of thing. So, but why don't you specifically talk about why patterns aren't flaws, that they're outdated survival strategies?
But they're not flaws because it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It means that it requires observation as to what is causing you to act and do those actions. So patterns, like just like brushing our teeth, where did we learn that? We learned that from someone, usually a parent, that you should wake up and that one of the very first things you should do in your morning is head to the bathroom and brush your teeth. You learned to do that. That's not something we consider to be a negative pattern in Western society, and probably in most of the world. But if you take that example in itself, in some cultures, that could be a negative pattern. Perhaps that's not something you do first thing in the morning, but we learn that. So our patterns aren't flaws because they're not necessarily something that's bad. It's something that you need to understand where it's coming from. Why do you react that way? Why do you think that way? Why do you believe that that is the course of action you should take? Why do you believe that you deserve, to be treated that way or not be treated that way? So,
So, why don't you tell us specifically? You said they're outdated survival strategies.
yeah.
Narrow that down for us, please.
I think a lot of us take what we're taught, whether it's directly or indirectly, by society, by parents, by our churches, etc., and we act accordingly. So, for example, I grew up Catholic and I learned that in order for me to receive the what is it called? The
The
consecration?
Eucharist.
The Eucharist, I needed to, go to church every Sunday. I needed to be a participating member of church, do activities. I needed to do and take actions on a daily basis that were heaven worthy. I learned those things. And so, what happens is a survival mechanism for most of my adult life. I went ahead and made sure that the actions that I took were what I was taught were heaven worthy actions, and that the hell worthy actions that I was not engaging in them. And so there's outdated survival strategies because I was just using that as a survival mechanism, as a way to live my life, to be able to abide by what I was taught was right. But that wasn't actually in alignment with me. It was like fighting, against the grain, against myself a lot of times. So I was just trying to survive rather than acting out of my own wants and desires in terms of what feels aligned for me. A lot of times we will take that and we will take our patterns and make them survival strategies just because we need a way to navigate the world. And we haven't taken the time to dig into what that feels like for us and how we want it to feel for us. We will just act out of what we know, what we've been taught, what society told us was okay.
which which is the way we survive, right?
Exactly.
Because we have to be part of the group to survive.
Yep. Part of
So,
the culture, part of the community, etc.
exactly. So now I want to jump to real quick, and we asked y'all, the audience, last week to look at judgment in your life. Just observe in the last week where you saw yourself judging yourself or judging other people. And I think it's apropos to what Louisa just said, is that probably a lot of the judgment that she accumulated as a young adult was based off of her Catholic faith. Because either you do the right thing, you do the wrong thing, and then there's this heaven or hell. And so that immediately sets us up in a judgmental, um,
Thought
uh,
process.
yes, and yeah, an archetype, what the word an architecture, an architecture of thinking, basically, about everything is either, you know, right, wrong, and as you walk down that spiritual road, that right wrong thing really gets pretty murky toward the end. And we can talk about that in a much later session. So anyway, hopefully y'all looked at every time you judged some situation or some person in this last week. And if you didn't, that is still a core foundation of living a awakened conscious life.
Yeah.
Because when you judge other people, there are judgments about yourself.
Yeah.
And when you're judging yourself, then you're definitely not living in 100% of your fullness. The last thing we're going to say before we jump into our first topic today, and I'm just repeating this from last week because I think it's important, and that is the way to lose patterns in your life is through awareness. And that means we're going to go back to the brushing our teeth thing example that we used. I think we used that last week too. Um, is that if you realize that your teeth are rotting out and they're rotting out because you're not cleaning them, then all of a sudden you have this awareness that I need to brush my teeth so they don't fall out.
Right.
And that's the same with every pattern. Every pattern that is false or true, because we can live in true patterns like brushing our teeth, right? Or driving a car properly. Um, every pattern that we live in needs to be investigated. But the ones that are false, once we start looking at them, that's 80% of what's going on. Because once you see what is false, then the false drops away because we are truth beings at our core level.
And that is the point of these 10 episodes is to really help you understand what to look at and, help you kind of dig into and ask the right questions to yourself about the why and the how behind it. How did you get to that point where you just act in that pattern and don't even recognize that that's how you're acting in that pattern? And is it in alignment with you? That is the point of this because in the day to day life, it is so easy for all of us to just move along and not recognize or give thought to why we do what we do. Because life moves very fast. And if you don't consciously make the choice to slow down, you'll just keep acting that way in those patterns for years and years. And I say that from experience.
Okay. Well, thank you, Louisa, from experience. Okay, so that's kind of a recap of last week and to get us started off again. So, do you want to talk? You've got a pattern for us, right?
Yes. So the pattern of I call it the intelligence trap.
So, this is the first pattern we're talking about of like 10 patterns
That's
that
correct.
we're going
This
to
is
do in the
the
next 10 episodes. Okay, so tell us
That's right.
pattern one.
Yeah, so it's the pattern of overthinking, and the disguise of this pattern is the intelligence trap. It's really when your mind, creates problems that don't really exist or like over analyzing things. And I'll start by saying this. This one is a hard pattern to distinguish in everyday life because especially in this society where it's a hustle culture and it's a, you know, how intelligent are you defines how much money you make sort of view of the world because it's very easy to think, well, I need to make a decision. I'll use a recent decision that I've made. I'll use the example of buying a vehicle, right? You can go ahead and show up at the dealership and walk around and feel out a vehicle that you want, a vehicle that is within all of the basic parameters that you should have set for yourself before you stepped foot on the lot. How much can I afford? That's kind of an important one. Um, and what am I looking for? Is this for leisure? Is this for work? Is this for business? Once you have those parameters, you could go and step foot in the dealership and walk around and be like, "Oh, this car calls to me. This energy of this vehicle calls to me, so I want to test drive that one." Or you could make a really long list of all of the things that you're looking for in that car and then show up at the dealership with a list that leaves you with one option that they have available or none. Now, you could argue, most of us would argue, that that person who showed up with that 15-point list of what they want in a vehicle is much more intelligent. They're more prepared. They did a lot more research before they stepped foot on that lot.
Mhm.
Gas mileage, power windows, how they work, don't work, the kind of transmission they want, whether they want it to be an EV, a hybrid, like all of these things that, I mean, on paper, that person sounds much more prepared. That person knows what they want to depths that the first person probably didn't even think through. But that is a pattern that can get you really in an overthinking state and
Mhm.
lead to decision paralysis. And therefore, what that ends up being is you kind of getting stuck. But this pattern is not easy to see. What happens to that second person who's so prepared is that when they're looking and making that 15 bullet point list of what they want in a car, they're replaying conversations they've had with Joe at the barbecue, 5 months ago when he got his new car. They heard Joe's wife's version of how she feels when she first stepped foot on the car or when she was driving the kids to soccer practice in that car, you know, and then not only are you making this list of what you want, but you are now also creating future scenarios about what could happen in that vehicle if you don't think thoroughly through every single aspect of that vehicle before you make the decision to purchase it. So now you're inviting, in my opinion, negative thought forms into the experience of buying and owning that vehicle because now you're thinking, well, Joe's wife said that when she was driving the kids to soccer practice, there wasn't enough space in there for all of the 5 kids' stuff. And now you're like, what if my wife gets pregnant and we end up with triplets and now we don't have enough space? And you know what I'm saying? And yes, I
That's a
did.
that's a big jump.
That's a big jump. But also, I want to point out that yes, I am outlining that as a negative experience. That would be a fucking negative experience to me. Okay. So, and then, other future scenarios, which usually are not as cute as the one that I just made. Usually you're then thinking, what if, my wife and my kids get stuck in the middle of the highway while they're driving these kids and while I'm traveling away on business. And that's what we start to do. So, this pattern that may seem like someone who's intelligent, who's thorough in their decision making process, can be a pattern of actually overthinking and allowing your mind to flow into making decisions based on fear because you're now thinking and creating problems that don't exist and are unlikely to exist, but
Right.
you just invited them into your energetic space. And I'm a big believer in that. So, this pattern of overthinking disguised as intelligence, there's a fine line. And that fine line cannot be defined by me, it cannot be defined by Bill, it cannot be defined by anyone except what that fine line looks like for you and except for what scenario that plays a part into. Because if you now, a different scenario, you have a child who is gluten free and who's oh my god, lactose intolerant and who
That's a peanut allergy.
has a peanut allergy and all of these things, and you're picking a restaurant, there is a level of awareness and this of depth that you need to dig into any meal your child could potentially order at that restaurant before you make the choice that that's where you're going. So in the car scenario, there was too much. There was a level of too much. But in this scenario, there may not be a level of too much because it has to do with your child's immediate safety. Now, if it's a restaurant that has both all of those options and regular options, do you need to sit there and dig into every single possibility of what your child could have? Or could you just go into the restaurant, tell your child these are the 5 options that are available to you, and keep it moving? So, I hope that helps to sort of, with identifying that fine line. It cannot be identified. I cannot sit here and give you a list of what that could look like and when, but it is important for you to recognize when the overthinking kicks in.
Let me ask you this question because you wrote this down, and I think this is interesting. You put that the hidden belief behind this overthinking is if I think enough, I can control pain.
Yeah.
So
And
talk to me about that.
if you've, in the car scenario, if you've driven a vehicle that you didn't do a lot of research on and you just went ahead and bought it because it was cute and because it fit your budget and because, you could put the top down and you love doing that on summer and you love driving to the beach in that. But unfortunately, it turns out that vehicle ended up coming with a lot of issues, creating a lot of issues for you, leaving you stranded on the highway a couple times. Then what you're trying to do in that scenario and being the second person in that car scenario is avoid that from happening again. Avoid from ever being stranded again. Avoid from ever having a car that gives you any issues again. And so what you're really trying to do is control the pain that that vehicle can cause you. And there is
Mm.
a level of that that you do have control over.
Mhm.
but you'll never be able to control all of it, which is what you're trying to do. Because much like heartbreak, once you experience it, you're like, I never want to go through that again. What can I do to avoid that, right? That's a really deep pain and it's very real for a lot of us. Once you get your heart broken and shattered and you're like, "Oh my god, I don't know if I can put myself back together after this one." You never want to feel that again. So you do everything you can in picking that next person, if you allow yourself to pick a next person, to make sure that they're so different from the first person that what actually happens is you end up in a whole different type of relationship that's going to cause you pain in a whole different type of way. It's unavoidable. The pain is unavoidable because we're not here to have pain free experiences.
Now, there's some real words. I completely agree with that. This is not a pain free environment because it's through the pain that we grow,
Yeah.
but we don't want to, oh, because we've experienced pain, we don't want to overthink our future to try and stay out of pain. We just need to accept the fact that there is a certain amount of pain that happens here with learning lessons, but we, at the same time, we don't keep walking into the fire, right?
Right, exactly. And I heard something, I don't know where it comes from, that has really stuck with me with regards to the pain. And it's not that we should run from the pain. It's that we need to become aware and so grounded and confident and trust in our ability to manage, handle, and get through the pain that we don't fear going into those new situations because you can't let the fear control you. What you need to know is that you've now gained the skills emotionally, mentally, spiritually to be able to work and walk through that pain that you will inevitably encounter again.
You will encounter because this life is a journey, it's an adventure, and any good adventure, any good travel, any good journey has obstacles.
Yeah, the pain is, I have nothing to add to the pain. I think you said it beautifully, but it is something that you have to accept as part of the journey and overthinking and overanalyzing and putting all of your hats with all your different degrees on and all of your experiences and all of your friends and family's experiences that you've heard, it's not going to make it better. What you need to focus on is identifying what is causing me to act this way? Why am I repeating this pattern? Where did that wound originate? So that you can then begin to understand the pain that it's causing you and how it's creating these fears that are causing you to overthink, overanalyze, and ultimately make you paralyzed in a lot of situations.
That's exactly, I was going to say it keeps you stuck, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the I think I shared before, on this podcast that I had a breath, work experience, a breath work session, with a breath work, coach, and to be honest, going into it, I was like, "This is bullshit," like, you know? But what I've learned is that it's not, and that it can be very healing, and healing in terms of it can really bring up a lot of stuff, and I think it all comes back to just getting quiet. There is this exercise where you can do 3 breaths and release the breath, and then that sort of gets you in a space where you're able to gain some clarity, and again, I know this sounds crazy because it's exactly what I thought before I did it myself, but if you're really having a hard time or just want to employ this practice to be able to understand where this overthinking wound and where this intelligence in disguise is really stopping you and getting you stuck, you can employ that practice. The way that I do it is I start with one breath, just a normal level breath, then a second deeper breath. And then that third breath is as deep as I can possibly take. Like I want to feel it in my lungs when I'm taking that third breath. And then after that third breath, you can wait about 3 Mississippis and release it.
3 Mississippis. Uh, so I'm going to tell everybody why this works. Um, and that is our breath is intimately connected to our physical body, right? And
Somatic.
when we are overthinking, we're kind of outside of our body and our brain's going. So, uh, just taking a breath, breathing in, breathing out, it grounds us. It
Yeah.
brings us from this place out there to right here.
Yeah.
And so that's the purpose in the breathing practices.
Yeah. And these are practices that you can employ in almost any aspect of your life. And the goal is exactly what Bill just shared is like bring you back to yourself. All of the answers they're all within you. They're not out there. They're not in your overthinking. They're not in all of these things that are happening outside of you. They're all right here, which is where you need to come back to.
Yes. And I would also say that over time, when you start making decisions and you're aligned with yourself, you'll have a felt, I call it a felt sense. You'll have a felt sense of whether or not something feels right to you, not to anybody else, but right to you. And the more you notice that, the more you'll start to practice that, and the more you'll drop your patterns, and you won't be caught up. Our minds are important, but we can get caught up in them, which we've been talking about. So you don't get caught up in your mind. You can feel the decision in your body.
Yeah.
And that leads to, I don't know, leads to a lot of good decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of growth and a much, much better experience here on this planet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was episode 1 on not overthinking and looking at that pattern of overthinking. We hope this helps y'all practice this week, and also practice your non-judgment. Also can practice these things all at the same time. It's super
Yeah.
easy. Anyway, we love y'all. Take care.
Until next time.
Till next time.
If you're waking up, questioning everything, and trying to reconnect with who you truly are, I wrote this book for you. It's a guide to remembering your divine nature, healing old conditioning, and stepping into inner sovereignty. If that resonates, check out the link below, www.atobook.com.